Okay, well, good morning, and thank you, Troy. And thank you to everyone for coming out here this morning. I think it's pretty well known that over the past several decades in this country, healthcare has consistently been one of the top issues of concern for Canadians, and certainly now is no exception to that rule. We have a system in crisis across the country with all kinds of stories of patients suffering, some sadly not getting their opportunity for healthcare before they pass away. And so when we were planning this event today, we thought it would make sense to start off with a public opinion panel to talk about what the public's views are about the system, what their thoughts are on different potential health reform options, and so forth. And so we've got two very good speakers lined up here today to really do a deep dive into this issue. Both of them will speak for about 10 minutes or so, and then when they're both done, what we're going to do is we're going to have an opportunity for questions. So on your table there in front of you, there's plenty of pens and green sheets. If you have a question that comes to your mind, please just write it down and then raise your hand with it. And my colleague Harrison here will come around and pick up the questions, and then he'll bring them to the front. So one thing that I'll do today is I'll keep the introductions very short. If you're interested in reading each speaker's full bio, you can go to secondstreet.org and just click on the link for the event today and read through all the bios. We have a lot of distinguished speakers here with very long bios because they've all done a lot in their respective fields, so if I read out the full bios, we won't have any time for presentations. And our first speaker is no exception. I asked him before the event this morning, I said, how long have you worked in public opinion research? And he said over 39 years. So needless to say, Steve brings a lot of experience when it comes to understanding what the public thinks about different issues. Steve is currently the Executive Vice President of Leger's Western Canadian team. So please join with me in welcoming Steve to the podium today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, and every time I get that number, is it 38, is it 39 years? I have been in public opinion polling since high school, literally. I started in a phone room in high school, and the first project I ever did was for Coca-Cola, when they did the brand switch of their formulation, biggest marketing disaster ever. And my job was to, in the back room, send out cola products across the country to interviewers who had taste test these with respondents. And of course, proudly, the results came back, and I'm sure the executive in front of the CEO of Coke said, we've found the winning formula. New Coke is better than the old Coke, so please make the switch. And they were very proud as they rubbed their hands together. And talking at the table about formulating the right questions, you know that this was a disaster story, because in the months that followed, there was 50,000 letters sent to the CEO saying, what are you doing? You can't change the brand of Coke, my favorite thing. And so they reneged on that and then came up with a new Coke. But long story short, I learned early in my career that asking the right question is absolutely critical. The question was not whether everybody knows from the beer test of the 90s, people they have a strong brand affiliation with what they consume as a beverage that goes way beyond just taste. Anyway, that's my short introduction. I'm happy to go through and present some slides today. I did join Leger. I've been in the industry for 38 years, as I mentioned. Spent a long career with Angus Reid, with Ipsos, did my own company for 12 years, sold it to Leger 2 years ago, primarily because of this. The most accurate polling company in the nation. We've more accurately predicted election outcomes than any other pollster. It's not easy to do, and I'm proud of that, but they were doing it so well, I thought I'd join them, and I've never looked back. So what's on the minds of Canadians? Just to set the framework, where does healthcare fit? This is our most recent poll that looks at the most important issues facing Canadians. And yes, inflation is still number one. Inflation, cost of living. Housing affordability is strong number two, but number three, healthcare. And we've seen in the last couple of years an increase in the concern on healthcare. And then we've got the other stuff. We got climate change, government debt, immigration, homelessness, all very important issues, but they really pale in comparison to those top three. Now, healthcare will increase. I've no doubt in my mind, having done this for a long time, that healthcare perceptions and concerns will increase. It will be an election issue because interest rates are going down. We just saw the rate cut, the third one. We'll see more in the months ahead. And inflation will probably be knocked out of place. Housing will still be number one for quite a few years to come, but healthcare most likely will be a strong number two heading into the fall, and certainly on a federal level for the next election. In British Columbia, you can see that housing prices affordability are through the roof in comparison to the national average. It's the #1 issue by a long shot. This is tracking over several years. This deck is available, so no need to take notes. It's download. It's all free information that's on our website, but I've compiled it for the session today. Healthcare is a strong #2. It's kind of fluctuated the last few waves, but it's still a very strong #2, and inflation third, so a very different spot in British Columbia as housing maintains that #1 spot. But if we break it down, we look at, just very quickly, and I'm going to go through these fast, healthcare as an issue is almost the #1 issue with anybody who is over the age of 55 plus. So it's an ongoing issue. It's more important among those who are in the older camps. And then if you look at it as a partisan issue, healthcare is about the same. When you look at the NDP, BC United supporters, Green Party supporters, not really a lot of difference. Or at this early stage in the election campaign, we haven't seen a radical shift in perceptions based on vote intention. Healthcare in Canada. So this is a very recent survey that Second Street was involved with in formulating some of the questions. We're going to present some fresh data. And I find the numbers quite shocking. So how would you rate, we start with, how would you rate the overall healthcare system in Canada? The numbers are terrible, 44% good, in fact only 4% very good. So think about that for a moment. If you compare this to any other sector, any other satisfaction number, it would be a lot higher. That's a decline of 10 points in 1 year. And at a federal level, any national issue, you almost never see that. A decline in satisfaction of 10 points in 1 year period. And conversely, the poor responses, 53%, really highlight what this conference is all about. So I'm not telling you anything new, but what I am telling you is that the numbers are crashing even faster than any of us would ever have imagined. If you look at the ratings of the healthcare system, it's not a whole lot different in BC, but there's a couple things that jump out in some of the green numbers there. Higher satisfaction among males and females. I think that's a whole other topic for our conferences, the gender divide in healthcare, but to have a 10-point differential in men versus women in satisfaction with healthcare is telling us something. And then the 55 plus group, 49% say it's good. You know, in a sense, not a bad number. They're the primary users of the system, and much lower numbers of the 18 to 34s and the 35 to 54s. This was a number from a year ago, so we haven't repeated this poll, but this really jumped out at me. This is a rating of the healthcare system from a sample of Americans and a sample of Canadians. And you can see the gap is tremendous. I mean, you look at the numbers here, you've got 74% of Americans rating the healthcare system as good versus 54% of Canadians. I mean, wow, it's just an incredible differential. And contrary to what the Canadian public perception might be, we take pride in our healthcare system. We think that we're better than the Americans. Total poor, 43% of Canadians, and remember this is a 10-point swing, so it's 53 now. Last year was 43, but only 16% of Americans rate their system as poor. So again, a wow number. Experience with ER visits, I'll skip over this quickly. A little bit better responses. A year ago, we had some really terrible numbers in the satisfaction with the ER system, but 70% is actually not bad, relatively speaking. I'll jump through that. It's higher satisfaction among older residents. I'm going to quickly go through this. Concerns about healthcare. There's a shortage of nurses. We all know that. Massive agree statements with that statement. That's not going away. I'm worried about the state of healthcare system in my province. Yeah, that's the same, 85%. That's similar across the country. It's a universal concern. My government doesn't spend enough money on the healthcare system, and we just heard earlier, is that the solution? But there's a perception that not enough money is spent. It's difficult to access healthcare, 70% agree. And this one jumped out at me and was personal because there's 70% of us who are worried that you would not receive good care if you need to go to the ER. And how many of us in the room have either thought with a parent or a brother or an uncle or sister or whoever that you've hesitated taking somebody to the ER because you're worried about the implications of them sitting in the hallway for 2 days waiting for care or whatever other outcome. So a real concern among all of us. Canada versus the US. Similar thing, there's 20, 30, almost 40-point gaps about concerns of their healthcare system in Canada versus the States. Privatization. So this is, again, framing the wording of the question. This is the general response we get with Canadians. Do you want to see more public, private healthcare in the Canadian system? The resounding answer is no, we don't. At least when you frame it on an overall level like this. And this is the rhetoric that politicians will use, I think sometimes in defense of what we have is, look, Canadians don't want anything to do with privatization. But you break it down further, I'll stop with, I'll continue that thought in a second. But here's the dichotomy. So 55% of Canadians think the healthcare system is better than in the USA. Despite that 20, 30-point gap in actual care satisfaction statistics, we still take pride oh, at least we're better than the USA as a general consensus. So when I show that slide of satisfaction, people's that are outside the healthcare system, people's jaws kind of drop and they go, wow, I didn't really realize that that's how dire things were. Okay, so this touches on privatization. We just did this poll and asked people, would you go to another country to have X, Y, and Z done? Dental procedure, yeah, a quarter of us would consider that. Surgery, quarter. A cosmetic medical procedure, 20%. Any other diagnostic work, an MRI, a CAT scan, or whatever, 28% would. And you start breaking down the countries, you know, Turkey, Mexico, lots of different, USA, we see that now. So that's in a sense an aspect of privatization. View on healthcare choices. So this, again, straight from Second Street as a poll question. You get quite a different response when you frame it in this way. So, thinking about healthcare choices in Canada, which statement best represents your point of view? Would you rather have Canada should keep our public healthcare system but allow patients to use their own money or their extended healthcare to pay for surgery at a local private clinic if they can't get timely care? Aha, so we have a dramatic reframing of the question. And I think that's a problem in our current sort of healthcare dialogue is that we tend not to get to that level. We look at the polls around privatization and we all get scared, maybe not this group, but we get scared away that we can't touch privatization, people are opposed to it. But not in the right framework. If you put it in the right context and say you're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, it is publicly acceptable. Mental health epidemic, I should say. 50% of us are mentally stressed because of the financial situation. So that's something that, and it's dramatically higher, again, in Canada than it is the USA. And I'm going to flip through very quickly to my conclusions to give your respected 10 minutes as well. Overall, so the overall ratings of the healthcare system are dismal at best and deteriorating at a rapid rate. Number two, while interest rates, inflation, and housing are dominating the public agenda, healthcare is not only a strong third in Canada, strong second in British Columbia, it's going to dominate the public agenda in the months ahead, unless we have some other major crisis. Inflation will dissipate, that will go away. Maybe along with that, the housing crisis, we'll see, but healthcare will continue to be top of the agenda. Number three, although Canadians think their healthcare system is better than Americans, scores indicate the complete and utter opposite. We are experiencing mental health crisis here in Canada, especially among millennials and Gen X. One of the stats that I didn't show is that if you look at the number of Canadians who are seeing a therapist for their own care, it's about 1 in 10 Canadians, and it rises to almost 30% of 18 to 34s. So 30% of millennial Gen X's are seeing some kind of a therapist. And it's super common. Maybe it's because all of us older folks are in denial for so many years, I'm not sure. But the youth of our world are certainly high on that list. Number five, the overall concept of privatization is met with opposition and skepticism, with the caveat, should have put the next point, privatization of certain aspects of the healthcare system is met with much more acceptance once you define it and have a common sense argument about it. And then exceptions, I should say, of intention to use out-of-province medical care is increasing and seen to be publicly quite acceptable. So thanks for your time, and we're going to turn it back to Colin and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve. That was great at giving us a good overview of what the public thinks about the system right now and potential reform options. Our next speaker is Jason Hatcher. He's the managing principal of Navigator, and he leads their Western Canadian operations from their Calgary office. And like Steve, Jason has a very long bio with all kinds of accomplishments and experience, including working for not one, not two, but 3 different provincial premiers. So I guess he got the hat trick there. Jason, very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say about healthcare reform here today. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. We are in election season, so a big thanks to 2nd Street for putting this together, and nothing starts election season off better than perhaps dueling pollsters. Like Steve, I've spent a lot of time looking at public opinion research over my career. I sort of stumbled into it when I was at the Memorial University of Newfoundland, where I grew up. In my first degree, I walked into an empirical analysis course thinking for sure I was going to walk out shortly thereafter, and many courses later. And here today, I've been looking at public trends with our team at Navigator for quite some time. We are in election season. In the next 18 months, we're not just going to have an election here in British Columbia, but in multiple provinces and obviously the federal as well. So the time to talk about healthcare is now, because change is required. And as Steve has already set up, and I think our research will be complementary with a slightly different perspective, Canadians are expecting change, and that's something that crosses generations. So for more than 20 years, we've been conducting public opinion research into Canadians' views on a full range of public policy areas. And in all that time, none of those areas has been more significant, consuming, or enduring than healthcare. As a result, we've worked for every sector in the healthcare field in every province and every territory. At Navigator, we recently undertook the latest iteration of research project to better understand the disconnect between the experience people have with Canada's healthcare system and their expectations of what it can and should be able to deliver. What we were curious to know was, could it be possible that Canadians had different views when they wore their consumer hats as opposed to their citizen or taxpayers' hats? Would that cause them to think differently about their healthcare as much as about their healthcare system? To do that, for several years, we've been looking closely at the views of Canadians on the most important issues related to healthcare, and I'm happy to speak later to the details of our methodology. Suffice to say that between the design of our studies, the concordance of the responses, and our experience, we have a high level of confidence in our results. So, spoiler alert, Canadians are way, way, way ahead of their institutional healthcare providers, including both governments and political actors, in wanting real change, which they define as choice, and wanting that change now. Now, this demand is particularly evident in our study of the boomers, a generation that has played a key role in driving the shift and many shifts in the recent history of Canada. And we heard that their healthcare expectations are driven by a variety of factors, including a desire to maintain good health through old age, far greater awareness of the seemingly miraculous possibilities of modern health care, their personal experiences in dealing with ill and aging parents, a level of education and knowledge about healthcare issues really not seen before in our country, and of course access to a resource that was not available before, and that of course is the internet, a resource of such. And perhaps most importantly, an expectation that their health care will be delivered on their terms. We looked at the boomer generation because we hypothesized that once boomers started using the system more, that is, once they aged into the system, they would begin to demand access to the system just like anything else, with a surfeit of choice. As it turns out, we were right. And since our last study in 2022, this trend has only accelerated. Just look at the delta between 22 and 24. But whilst we were looking at boomers, another major trend was emerging, something that we actually didn't expect. In the latest round of research, we found that not only does Generation Z and Millennials support greater private involvement, but they are more dissatisfied with the current state of the system than older generations. Notably, this plummets to an abysmal plus 14 for Gen Z and only slightly higher satisfaction amongst Millennials. Clearly, unlike older cohorts, those younger generations are not willing to wait and see the changes that they wish. Our data also saw satisfaction with the public healthcare system at only plus 38 for boomers. And so, synthesizing our findings, we came to some striking observations. First and foremost, Canadians unequivocally dismiss the conventional wisdom that the healthcare system in its current form is somehow sacrosanct. For decades, conventional wisdom was held that changing the status quo in healthcare has been the third rail of Canadian politics. Not anymore. Canadians are far more open to healthcare reform than we had previously understood. Not only do they expect reform, but they also believe that change is inevitable in their lifetime. Most at 89% agree we have avoided making changes for too long, up 5 points since 2022. Moreover, 86% agree that the healthcare system needs to change to meet the needs of people like them, up 7 points in the last 2 years. And it's not just because Canadians have come to realize that the current delivery apparatus is unsustainable. No, it's not just the realization that cost and an aging population have pushed the Canadian healthcare system to the brink. It is not the belief that there has been mismanagement, nor is it an exercise in assigning blame. Nope, none of these factors adequately explain Canadians' desire for change. Rather, it is a fundamental belief that the system is neither flexible nor elastic enough to meet their needs. Most Canadians now agree the healthcare system will not be able to meet the needs as the population ages and costs increase, with a double-digit net agreement increase in those sentiments over 2 years. Crucially, they're simply not willing to accept this solution as inevitable. Canadians hold bifurcated views on this. As citizens and taxpayers, they have significant concern about the cost that medical and technological advances put on the system. But as consumers, they are beginning to demand access to those very advances. And of course, there is no greater domain for technological advances than artificial intelligence. And the majority of Canadians, 51%, are actually comfortable with AI involvement in healthcare delivery, speeding up test results and sensors and the like. Moreover, our data indicates a growing comfort amongst Canadians with diversifying their healthcare providers. The high levels of comfort with pharmacists at 92%, nurse practitioners at 91%, offering services traditionally handled by physicians, reflect a shift and adaptability within the healthcare system itself. Canadians are not only open to new professionals delivering care, but also different platforms. We found that 76% of Canadians are comfortable receiving health care virtually. That's via phone or online appointments. Now, let me stress a significant point. Canadians want access to and choices in all services. We asked Canadians about the treatments they would be willing to pay for out of pocket. And look here, while it's no surprise that we found traditional consumer services like plastic surgery at the top of the list, look down a little further on the screen. We find almost half of all Canadians ready and willing to pay for critical services like cancer screenings, vaccinations, non-elective surgeries, chronic disease treatments, and ER care. Overall, we have found a strong acceptance for many private functions and an expectation that the role of these functions provided by the private sector for all services would, in fact, continue to grow. The fact is, privatization participation in a public healthcare system is no longer a boogeyman. Rather, it is seen as an essential tool in the delivery of services that will meet their needs. Over 2/3, 69%, agree some health care services should be provided by the private sector, up 5 points since 2022. In fact, Canadians are largely aware of the burgeoning network of healthcare services that already exist, private services that operate seamlessly and without disseminable impact on the public system. People consider it outdated, old-fashioned, even to refer to these private services as un-Canadian. So what does all this mean? Well, let's start by one thing. Policymakers and the public are up for change. As one participant from a research study succinctly put it, I believe that the people of Canada have been ready for some time. The problem is the politicians. So what's the holdup? Another participant from our research study succinctly articulated, if politicians prove unable or unwilling to adapt to the prevailing political climate, they will quickly find themselves on the outside looking in. Politicians unwilling to act will be on the wrong side of public opinion. Now, that's not to say that Canadians are ready, nor are they willing to adopt an American-style system. Care and consideration must be given to cultural sensitivities. The vocabulary must tip its hat to universality and progressiveness, and users of private services must continue to pay into a public pool. Because the imperatives for this change have not only been turbocharged by COVID delays and the fiscal situation of governments, who are not only broke, but have zero permission space to raise taxes. And that makes room for opportunities. Because that which people previously believed to be off the table are not only on the table, they are waiting to be picked up. So if everything is on the table, what are some of the things you can look at? Innovative financing models. We must explore sustainable financing options that support healthcare innovation without placing undue strain on taxpayers. Flexible tiers of service delivery offering greater flexibility and choice while ensuring universal access to essential care for all Canadians. Streamlined regulations, reducing bureaucratic barriers to enhance service delivery and alleviate pressure on the public system. Public sector integration, expanding the private sector's role in delivering a broader range of services in a way that complements and strengthens the public system. Labor market readiness, strengthening and the credentialing process and to ensure a diverse and adequately prepared healthcare workforce that can meet growing demands. What we know is the Canadian public is tired of political speaking points, royal commissions, and 10-year studies. What they are looking for is the ability to consume healthcare services in the same way they consume everything else in their lives, on their own terms, when and where they want it, in a way that suits them. The race is on to meet these expectations, and it's going to be to the swift. Those who can meet Canadians' demands and do it faster than others and communicate it effectively will gain a significant advantage. Welcome to election season, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Looking forward to your questions.
Okay, well, listen, thank you both for those very insightful presentations. And just a reminder that if you do have questions, just to write them down on the green sheets in front of you, and Harrison will bring them over. We only have a few minutes here, but I do want to talk about something that both of you kind of alluded to, and that is the language when you talk about healthcare reform and how important it is to explain things carefully, I think, to Canadians. Do you have any thoughts around this whole notion of governments partnering with third parties in the delivery of healthcare? In Alberta, they use the term charter health facilities. Ontario uses independent health facilities. Other people might say a nonprofit clinic, straight up private clinic. Any thoughts on language or advice?
I'd say the most dangerous part of the language is the slippery slope phenomenon that happens. So whether it's, in British Columbia, the TELUS healthcare kind of controversy, or sending cancer patients to Bellingham, all of those in and of itself, if you frame them right, can be seen as acceptable, and the polling would suggest that. The problem is when you attach other implications or other assumptions that the public makes. Well, if you're sending cancer patients down, then what? And then it goes on and on. or tell us if you're going to offer these types of services to privately insurance holders of that particular product, then what about this and that? So I think that's the fundamental problem, whether it's polling or as a healthcare decision maker, is that slippery slope.
You know, when it comes to the vocabulary, I think you start with universality and progressiveness. I mentioned that in my slides. The problem is then the conversation as it currently stands stays there. It stays in that endless debate, that circle that people are tired of. We need to move the discussion to results. People are looking for choice, they're looking for those services. So that's where the discussion needs to be taken, and that's where the vocabulary needs to really adapt to what people are looking for. Look, we all have those iPhones, or some of us still have Androids, but that's only been since 2009. The impact has been profound. Everybody wants everything right away. Instant gratification. Why do we think healthcare would escape that, especially when it's so important? We have an aging population that we've been talking about since I grew up in Newfoundland. It is here, and they're expecting change. They've grown up with it. Baby boomers got new hospitals, they got new schools, they got new universities, and they're demanding new ways of receiving healthcare and support as they're aging.
I want to squeeze in one more question just before we wrap this one up, but someone raises an interesting point, and I'm going to try and paraphrase the question, but the public, it seems like they're ready for reform, but this person used the term NIMBY, not in my backyard. And I think they're getting at this point that people, they want to see reform happen, but is there hesitancy to see it happen local to them first? Like, are they wanting maybe another province to do it first, perfect the change, so then it comes to their province? Or do you feel that the public is really ready to start seeing change happen locally first for them?
I think the results are driving the need for change. And I think Canadians are more and more wanting to be at the forefront. I think they would, perhaps more than before, would happy to be part of a cohort that gets to see things done differently. But we went for years where we just didn't talk about private involvement in public delivery of healthcare, but it was happening all the time. One of the biggest oppositions came from Quebec, yet that was where it was used the most. So I think actually Canadians have moved past that. I think the discussion has evolved. I think it is being driven by expectations and results. And I think that a lot of Canadians would welcome that as long as we maintain our universality, as long as we maintain that equality, a Canadian sort of fundamental, and people have access to it. I think Canadians are open to experimentation. I think they want to see it in their own backyard. I don't think it's about NIMBYism. I think it's giving me a chance.
I agree, and also your polls show more of the willingness to accept the change. Our polls show more like the fed-upness, if you will, of the system. You can't have year-over-year 10-point drops in a universally held system and not have the public demand more, whether it's to the voters in the province of BC or at a federal level. We're going to see it playing a role. So I don't think people are worried about, oh, let's try it in Ontario, let's try it in Quebec, not here. I think there's demand across the country that enough is enough is enough.
And I think if they do see it succeed somewhere else, they'll want it right away in their backyard, and they won't want to wait. They want to understand why this table can get it, this one can't.
We're actually seeing a very bold plan for health reform provincially here in BC with the BC Conservatives. Is there something unique about BC, or is there enough support for change right across the country that we might see a federal party embrace significant reform?
Well, you saw the hint in my slide of the pain points of British Columbians and the housing crisis. So we're financially pinched more than everybody else on every measure. If you measure stress due to finances, if you measure inability to pay the mortgage or rent or afford groceries, British Columbians are financially stressed. So I think that's maybe the trigger point of if you can ease the financial stress via some method of the healthcare system, whether it's through the tax-paying public as a whole or for individuals, that's where you're going to see the most pick up and support.
I think it's interesting that British Columbia is kind of the first of the dominoes of the elections that are coming in. There's a lot of innovation and different ways of thinking that have always traditionally come from British Columbia. And I think people are going to be watching this. I think both federal parties and provincial parties are going to be watching to see how this plays out. Now, of course, The trick here is, will healthcare be the dominant push as we go forward? Affordability, some of the issues that Steve mentioned, housing and the like, and obviously the massive changes that we've seen in the electoral landscape here in British Columbia over the last several months are all going to play into it. We're now going to have certainly a brighter light on the Conservatives, and so that will bring out a lot of issues. But if they're successful, and they already have established, and it's being talked about across British Columbia, as Steve said, this new approach to healthcare, that may really spur an interesting debate, and it really will put the governing party, the NDP here right now, the current governing party, in an interesting position of how they're going to react to that. I think if I'm the Conservatives, I like playing this election out on healthcare, on a policy issue.
One of the trends that we track through is the rise of populism, the rise of the right-wing vote in Canada, and lots of reasons behind that. We could do a whole hour on that discussion. But, as much as British Columbians love their matcha lattes and yoga and walks on the beach, we are part of that movement as well. There's a dramatic move to the right. I didn't show the political charts that we've been tracking, but the Conservatives, the Conservative Party BC went from 17% support a year ago to 41% now. That's an overnight shift. And so all that goes with that in the healthcare arena on the right spectrum is falling into place in BC, across Canada.
Look, I reside in Calgary, I spent a lot of time in Vancouver, so I'm certainly not going to sit here and preach about British Columbia, but I will say this. It's easy in the cities to forget there are very different challenges outside the cities in rural or smaller municipalities, if you will. And they demand the same change that others are looking for. And they are looking for technology to be leveraged to deliver services. They don't want to have to come to Vancouver for everything, or the nearest town. So I think there's also that piece that politicians are going to tap into. And if they do, and they're able to show that there's results while keeping that universality, I think they're going to have a very strong audience to listen to, not just within the cities, but in the areas outside the cities.
I'll ask you to get your crystal balls out for a moment and think about this discussion 5-10 years down the road. I mean, both of you sort of talked about this in your presentations, the younger generation that's coming up and their views about healthcare. How is that going to shift the debate? Because they have different feelings about the system than those who are older. They've been subjected to different talking points among politicians. They've seen different changes and so forth. So what do you think, what kind of impact will that have?
I don't mean to smile. I think of my 14-year-old son and my 17-year-old daughter, who seem to think anything from 5 to 10 years ago was at best the olden days, and everyone's just silly. I think if we get it right, I think Canadians are going to look back at this discussion, and the younger generations that will then be coming into their own and being in decision-making roles as, why did it take so long? It took us, I think, is probably going to be the attitude. I think if we don't get it right, you're going to have a group of individuals who have watched their grandparents, and in some cases parents, suffer through a system that wasn't able to meet their needs. And I think there will be a more than a desire for change. I think there will be an anger. I think there will be a hunger for change, and it will come. This is happening. People need to realize it, get on the train, or they'll lose in real peril at some point.
Just to refer to Gen X and millennials and Gen Zs, all of them feel like us as parents have ruined the planet. So we've ruined the environment, we've ruined the jobs market, and we've ruined the housing market kind of single-handedly. Anybody who has a kid under the age of 29 probably gets that rhetoric. Healthcare is no exception. We've kind of, through our system, ruined the healthcare system. So, and you pointed out, they're angrier, they're more upset about it, they're less satisfied, as my numbers have shown. So without a major catalyst on the horizon, I'm not usually a pessimist, but there's nothing out there, at least in my line of sight, that would change the outcomes. So we have an aging population. We have an angry group of young citizens that are now starting to vote, and we've got a deteriorating healthcare system in terms of public perception on the satisfaction front and the public policy front. So why would we expect in 5 years something would change unless there's like a cataclysmic change of some sort?
And I think that's so right, Steve, because you look at where millennials and Gen Z have focused their kind of attention, their ire, right? Climate change, affordability, and a housing crisis, rightfully so. Well, now they have their grandparents and parents aging. So where's that eye going to go next? Where's that focus going to go next? And they're going to demand change.
Fascinating. Okay, well, listen, I wish we could spend more time because I could listen to you guys speak and share your wisdom for hours, but we've got to wrap this panel up and proceed to the next one. Thank you both for your insight today.